Well, welcome everybody. This is March 22nd, 2025, and this is the LaRouche Organization's Manhattan Project meeting in Manhattan. I'm Jason Ross. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the LaRouche Organization, and we are going to have a wonderful discussion about economics here today. We know that Trump has many things he doesn't like. The question is, what are we going to do? What does an economic recovery look like in the United States, and how can we learn from the past successes, such as from our first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, to achieve a victory today? We will begin with some remarks from Lyndon LaRouche.
This is New England, a good place to choose for dealing with this because it was here in New England as defined in 1630 by John Winthrop, the founder of New England, otherwise known as the Massachusetts Bay Colony at that time, that the foundations of the states of Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, and Rhode Island were made under the leadership of Winthrop and those associated with him. From that point on, there was a certain policy about the developing of a nation in North America, starting from the Massachusetts colony. That policy has continued as a viable policy to the present day. It did not, however, start entirely here. It was a concept which was brought to North America by Europe. It was a policy which, in one form or the other, already dominated the late 15th century, the so-called century of the Renaissance. And it was from the Renaissance that the ideas of our present, or what should be our present foreign policy, and what has been at our best times in the past, was founded from those ideas. From the time of the Roman Empire, at the time of the birth of Christ, civilization in the Mediterranean region had collapsed, degenerated, and continued in a degenerate form of one degree or another for about 15 centuries. But with the birth of Christ and the leadership role of his apostles, it was a new conception of man and society, which is based largely upon the foundations of the classical Greek tradition, especially the ideas associated with the work of Plato. And you'll find in the apostles, especially in the Gospel of St. John or the epistles of Paul, you'll find this conception of man on which our later foreign policy here was founded. You find it established there, especially, for example, in Paul's epistle of 1 Corinthians in chapter 13, where this concept of man was set forward. The idea is that man is not an animal. Man, unlike any other species, is capable of willfully increasing our species' power in and over the universe. This is possible because we have a power which is called technically cognition, the power to discover universal physical and other principles, to prove that those principles are correct, and to apply those principles in ways which enable us to increase man's power in and over the universe and to improve the conditions of life of the human being. This quality in the person, the quality of cognition, combined with the determination to do good in the sense of increasing man's power in the universe, in the sense of improving the conditions of life of human beings through the use of this power, was called in the ancient Greek agape. It is a term which was the subject of the original Greek version of Paul's 1 Corinthians, notably 1 Corinthians 13. For a long period of time, almost 14 centuries, from the birth of Christ, there was a struggle by Christians to establish a society which was consistent with that principle. That is, that all men and women are equally made in the image of the Creator by virtue of having this power of cognition, the quality of agape, the potential to increase man's power in and over the universe, and to improve the conditions of life through the discovery of these kinds of principles, which no animal could do. And thus we must have a society fit, a form of society fit for that quality of creature, man, cast in the image of the Creator. And it was only in the 15th century, in a period called the Golden Renaissance, that the first successful steps were made to actually establish this kind of society for which people had struggled and dreamed over the intervening 14 centuries. This developed in the middle of the 15th century around an event which is called the Council of Florence. But the enemies, the Roman feudal tradition, tried to stop the emergence of this form of society, which we call today the sovereign nation state. And therefore, powerful forces centered in Venice organized a revolt against the efforts to form this kind of society. The first such nation states based on this principle were France under Louis XI. And following that, modeled on the success of Louis XI in France, Henry VII in England founded the first modern nation state in England, though his son and successor, Henry VIII, as we all know, erred. He stepped in the wrong direction a few times. He had a Monica Lewinsky in his life. So, as a result of the struggle in Europe, and remember, Europe was dominated from about 1517 until the middle of the 17th century, that is 1648, by religious wars. Those who opposed the nation state in Europe tried to defend the old feudal order in one way or another by pitting parts of Europe against each other in religious wars. And terrible religious wars dominated Europe during most of the 16th century and the first half of the 17th century, until the Treaty of Westphalia. Now, it was under these conditions that people in England and elsewhere conceived of establishing a new nation state on the continent of North America. The first such venture was the founding of New England by that name by John Winthrop in 1630. And it's from that that the United States came. Now, Massachusetts was not always good. New England was not always good. It deteriorated. But nonetheless, what was done under the leadership of Winthrop and collaborators of his, such as the Mather family in education and so forth, this was the foundation of what was continued by Benjamin Franklin during the 18th century in leading this nation, or what became this nation, to founding the United States.
Well, that is from Lyndon LaRouche. We're going to hear now from 4 speakers and then have discussion, Q&A. We will be ending this meeting absolutely no later than 3:30. That's a hard end time. So we'll now hear from Diane Sayre, followed by Dennis Speed, myself, and Jose Vega. Diane?
So I presume you can hear me. What the heck is going on in the world? A lot of us, myself included, were deeply relieved by the resounding defeat of the collective Biden, Cheney, Bush, British imperial blob on the 5th of November. And certain things that we hoped for, like the potential to end the proxy war, as our Secretary of State correctly called it, in Ukraine against Russia, which is a proxy for a war of the Anglosphere against Russia, in which maybe 1.5 million people have died, primarily Ukrainians, contrary to the mainstream media. Trump and President Putin have had 2 telephone conversations at great length. And I think certain wrong conceptions, or I don't know if it's Trump's bargaining approach, but certain ideas held by Keith Kellogg, the first emissary, or things we heard Trump saying, we're going to tell the Russians, or we're going to. No, the Russians have won the war. You're not going to tell them the terms of surrender. That is not how this is going to work. It also is the case that you do have to address the root causes of the war, which actually go back to the promise in 1990 given to Gorbachev that NATO was not going to expand in return for a peaceful reunification of Germany. And if you had lost 27 million people to the Nazi onslaught, the fact that the Soviet Union agreed to the reunification of Germany was a big deal. That was a sacred trust, which we violated 5 times with NATO expansion. And then to pile on top of that, under Obama and Victoria Nuland, who now is teaching with Hillary Clinton and Mike Pompeo at Columbia University at the School of International and Public Affairs, which, by the way, is presided over by a Mossad agent named Karen Yarhi Milo, who supposedly left Israeli intelligence to work at the Israeli mission to the UN. And everyone knows no diplomatic missions have intelligence agents in them. So I'm so glad she changed her career. And her husband runs the American Israel real estate company. So is it a surprise? And why, Mike Pompeo, Hillary Clinton, and Victoria Nuland. And you think about something that's been bothering me for a while, which is, why is it that the fanatical terrorist Israelis are in bed with the pro-Nazi Ukrainians? But maybe that goes back to Jabotinsky, who was actually Ukrainian. And the method is the same. It's terror, it's dictatorship. So what did we do? Under Obama and Victoria Nuland, with $5 billion, which she bragged about, we overthrew the government of Ukraine. We put in a regime that banned the Russian language, banned 13 opposition parties, banned Russian language media. And then when the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass wanted to have their own special status, went ahead and killed 14,000 people, which you never hear about. What we heard about is the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then after Trump won the election, after the American people overwhelmingly rejected Dick Cheney and a continuation of the war, Biden tried his, or whatever is Biden, we don't really know what that is. We do know the Democratic Party told us that he was absolutely fit and sharp as a tack for his whole time in office. Began telling the Ukrainians, go ahead and use your long-range missiles to strike targets deep inside Russia. So the closer we got to January 21st, the closer we came to a potential thermonuclear war. Now, luckily, the Russians had developed hypersonic missiles to the tune of Mach 10 and even Mach 11, something people here said was not possible, or they didn't know how it would be possible because of the plasma that's formed on the surface of these things and what you have to do to travel at that speed. And they delivered an Orezhnik missile in the middle of this, a missile against which not any single nation on the planet has a defense. That was an important message. And President Putin said that we're happy we have this because we don't now need to use nuclear weapons. They had superseded that technology with a new technology based on physical principles not yet mastered by the so-called civilized nations of the US and Western Europe. So that was useful, but now Trump and Putin are talking. And I heard an interview with that Scott Ritter did with Maria Zakharova, only the beginning. She made the point that really there has been no diplomacy between the US and Russia for 16 years. And as people may know, before Trump and Putin spoke, there was no, Tony Blinken said, I'm not talking to them. That we had 2 big nuclear superpowers and no talking for the last 3.5 years. So this is a very, very important earth-shattering shift. What is the response of the Europeans to this shift? peace. What? Peace? No, we cannot have peace with Russia. We know that Putin is going to be invading, and what we have to do is go back, and if you didn't see my symposium of last night, please watch it, because what they're talking about with 800 billion euros of funding to be able to go it alone without the United States to have a war with Russia. And you notice Trump joked about that when Starmer was meeting with him in the White House. He said, yeah, you guys could take on Russia by yourselves, right? And Starmer kind of looked a little nervous. But this is what they're proposing. It will not work. They have no energy thanks to Joe Biden blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline along with Liz Truss and the Norwegians and whoever else helped us to do that. The cost of energy in Germany is about 4 times what it was. All their industry and manufacturing is left. So you can flood the place with money. You don't have the workforce or the plant and equipment to produce the weapons for your war with Russia. So what do? Do you go fascist? Do you do what happened in 1933 when they went from 2% of the budget being for the military to 20% with the famous MEFO bills that were designed to just fund the war? Is that what Europe is going to do right now? How's that going to work out? Not well. Are you going to tell the German people, hey, we know the price of energy has gone up quite a bit and you're not very happy, but we'd like you to sacrifice a little more so we can have a war with Russia? I can see that working brilliantly. So you have a revolt in the populations of Europe against the policy coming down from the central banks, which are their government. We have in the US, Mark Carney, who's not really in the US. He's the new Prime Minister of Canada, supposedly interim or longer. Who is Mark Carney? He's the former head of the Bank of England. What did he say at a meeting here at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, of central bankers? He said, we need regime change. We can't have elected governments running their countries. We need the central bankers to run their countries. And I've been thinking that installing Mark Carney, when, by the way, you know, Canada is not it's not a republic. It's under the King of England. So they had to get permission from the King to hold their elections and all of that. So the British, and by the way, King Charles has just offered that the United States can join the Commonwealth again for our 250th anniversary. And the press are reporting that Trump received that kindly. I hope that's not true. We have to make it not be true. This would be a horror. Can you imagine? George Washington would turn over in his grave. Hamilton will come up from his grave right down the street and do something. At any rate, so Mark Carney had to give up his British, and I forget what else, but now he's only a Canadian citizen, so he can carry out his plan on the border of the United States. And I was thinking, isn't this a little bit like overthrowing the government of Ukraine and putting Nazis in power? So the British have brought in, you know, the central banker on the border of the United States to try and throw us off. And then, while all this is going on, we have the ceasefire, which we were so happy had occurred. The hostages were released, prisoners were coming home. We thought, and what happens? Oh, well, Netanyahu has decided to continue. First, he did the blockade. So then the Houthi in Yemen said, well, if you're going to blockade the Palestinians again, then we're going to start firing on Israeli ships again. And then Trump says, all right, we're going to start bombing you. Now, how did we do in Afghanistan? They had 65,000 people in sandals fighting us. Did we win? Are we going to defeat Yemen? We're not. Are we going to have a war with Iran? That would be brilliant. Iran now has just completed military exercises with China and Russia. So what the heck is going on? Whose hand is behind this? Who doesn't want there to be a new paradigm of relations among nations, which is no longer based on colonialism? And what we do is very important, because I'm not sure that President Trump or people on his team exactly understand that this is what is at stake. Talking about grabbing the Panama Canal, Greenland, and now Canada, okay, they could be the 51st state. I'll concede on that. I mean, if they're going to put Mark Carney in charge, they have no business trying to pretend they're an independent country. But other than that, these other things are extremely alarming. What is informing the direction that we are going? And it's not, and then we have first J.D. Vance making this phenomenal speech at the Munich Security Conference, denouncing the Europeans for overturning their elections and not having freedom of speech. And then you hear that the FBI is setting up a special task force to find anti-Semitism on 60 college campuses so that anyone who speaks out about the atrocities being committed by the Israelis is going to be deported even if you have a green card. So what is this? What is going on? Where does this unravel? Then we get promised that the Epstein files are going to be released. That stopped. My own personal theory is that AIPAC is so intermeshed with Epstein's group that we're not going to hear about that. We're not going to hear about that, at least not right now. And you ask the question, why is this tiny group of perverts who have a lot of money, why do they have so much power in American politics? How can that be? You go down the streets in Manhattan, do you know actually how few people now support what Israel is doing in Gaza? It is not the majority, not even close. So how do they get away with this? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just saying it as a question. Now, I started thinking about something that I've observed here, because we want to talk about economics. And in New York City, one thing I've been thinking about is the enormous number of storage facilities. Now, I don't remember, when I was a kid, I don't remember storage facilities on every block. And Michelle did some intelligence arriving here today. They just opened one across the street. And I Googled how many storage units in Manhattan. I wanted to know. And AI, to show you why you should learn to think for yourself and not have it, AI said 1,036. And I thought, what? That is not right. Maybe 1,036 companies. Anyway, Michelle asked the people opening up the new storage place across the street. They have 5,000 units by themselves. Okay, so if you have 1,000 companies that each have 5,000 units, that's like 5 million, right? That's 5 million. Now, who is using all this? Are people? Some people are living in it. We know that because housing is not affordable. We also know that since housing is not affordable, people are downsizing, right? You had to bring your mother-in-law and your father-in-law and your children, and they're all now in one place. And you really love that gorgeous antique dresser that your grandmother had, but there's no room for it in your house, so you put it in storage. And then no one plays the piano anymore, so there's beautiful grand pianos in storage all over the place. And then you have something relatively new, and it's unique to the so-called prosperous garden nations, as Joseph Borrell said, which is something called, I think, compulsive shopping disorder. So since they came up with the brilliant idea of the service economy, or I love this, the service industry. Service is an industry. I thought industry was where you made stuff, but now we have a service industry. So we have a service industry. You don't produce. And then COVID made it worse. And maybe it's a conspiracy of all the mass shooters at the shopping malls. No one goes to the shopping mall, and you sat there and you ordered on Amazon, and it comes to your house. And you get a little like a chemical, thrill. It's like getting likes on Facebook when you buy things. And then they show up at your house. And you have more and more and more and more and more things. And then you don't want to throw them out, so you put them in storage. So the combination of downsizing, no one has any space to live, they're all cramped in with a zillion other people, and that we don't produce, and that people are bored, and we have been turned into addictive personalities, right? You use your cell phone and you get, don't you really just have to have this incredible blouse that makes you look perfect? Did you see that fancy battery thing? Because if the world ends and all the power goes out and you're drowning in your car, you need this device, which can open your windows and play the radio and tell you where you are and send messages to your family members that you're drowning in a car with your exact coordinates. Don't you need to buy that? Right? And so, and we have been turned into addicts. We have a really sick economy and a sick culture, and it's typified by the thing that just opened this storage. And I looked at the streets as I drove here. Do you know how many shops there are selling secondhand junk? That's the new business, right? So we don't produce anything new. We sit here like blobs consuming and ordering stuff, and no one ever thinks about how it gets to your table or your bedroom or wherever you're putting it. So how do we get out of this? And LaRouche wrote something, which Jason will go through more, called his 4 laws. The first of which is you have to put this whole damn rotten bubble system through bankruptcy reorganization. Unfortunately, far too many people today understand economics as money. They think of monetary theory, and we've all heard, right? Well, Elon Musk has promised us if we just get rid of enough crap, and believe me, there is plenty of crap, and people around the world are celebrating the shutdown of USAID. I just read an interview this morning of someone in Africa who said, oh yeah, the amount of money that goes to medicine or anything is like this, and everything else is to overthrow our government. So we're getting rid of a lot of crap. That's good. Well, then they're going to give us all a check. And it might be $250 and it might be $5,000. And guess what we can do with that check? We can buy more stuff and we can put it in storage. That's great. But will that give us a high-speed rail? Will that give us thermonuclear fusion? Will that make sure that every single child on the planet has clean drinking water? No, because people aren't thinking that way. They're thinking in terms of money, and they're not thinking in terms of physics. And they're not thinking of what went into the fact that we are here in a room talking about ideas, and we have lights, and we have food, and we had a kind of broken down transportation system to get here, but nonetheless we could get here. We should really improve that. So what do you need after you put the system through bankruptcy reorganization and create a system of credit, no more Federal Reserve, national bank, system of credit and fund? And LaRouche talks about the importance of a science driver. And I'm just going to start with the last thing because I think it's the boundary of everything. And it also gave me an idea about where all the stuff in storage is going to go. But, which is why, and LaRouche wrote a paper in 1986 called The Science and Technology Needed to Colonize Mars. So why do we need to colonize Mars? And I was just looking at, and I had one theory, which is true, which is in 4 or 5 billion years, the sun is going to expand and the planet's going to get sucked in and it's all going to be over. And if you care about Beethoven or you care about the great things that humanity has produced, you don't really want to lose all of that. But you could say that's 5 billion years off. But there's another question, which is that for us to continue to exist, we have to grow. The economy has to grow. The population has to grow. We have to actually consume more energy, right? We have to increase our power over nature so we can live more efficiently. And at some point, we're not near it, but maybe after we get 100 billion people or so on planet Earth, we will have outstripped, as Kraft Erica said, maybe at a certain point, it'll be hard for the Earth to sustain 100 billion or 200 billion or maybe a trillion. A trillion people might be difficult on this planet. So how do you continue this growth, and shouldn't we actually be figuring out, and I have no idea how we could get out of our solar system, since right now it takes us so long just to get to the edge of it, but we should be working on that. We also have threats from space. There are asteroids. People heard there was an asteroid that had perhaps a 3% chance of striking us, and then they decided it was much less, so I guess everyone went back to not worrying about it. And they said, well, this asteroid could just wipe out a city. You know, it might kill 100 million people. Don't worry. Well, we only know about 40% of the asteroids that are that size. Don't you think we should know where they are? I mean, I would like to be able to divert them, or if you can't divert them, at least evacuate the city. I don't find it pleasant or acceptable to say, oh, we're just going to lose 100 million people somewhere. So these are all reasons why we need to do this. And I just wanted to take you through a little bit about how he says we have to do it, or what are the things. And let me just say a couple other things. Kraft Erika, the great German space scientist who was a collaborator and good friend of LaRouche and his wife, used to say, if God intended for man to be a spacefaring species, he would have given us a moon. Oh, we have a moon, don't we? And it was very well planned, because if you watch when people are going to space, the landing is the most difficult part. You're coming in at a high speed, and you're trying to land without destroying everything. Like when the capsule comes back to Earth, it often lands in the water, right? It's very hard. I guess Elon Musk now has these rockets that can actually land again without destroying. That's a big deal. That's very hard because of the gravity. So not only do we have a moon, but the gravity on the moon is 1/6 that of Earth, which has created an easier way for us to land. Imagine if the gravity on the moon were 6 times that of Earth. I don't think we'd have a good time landing there. That would be really difficult. So not only do we have a moon, but it is positioned and designed to be ideal for us to get to. And Mars, the gravity is a bit more. I think it's about 40% that of Earth. We're going to see how terrible having zero gravity is, as Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore try and claw their way back into physical shape from having been stuck on the space station, thanks to Biden, for 8 months, or however long they were up there. Terrible. So LaRouche said, all right, to get to Mars, we should start. There's a few areas that we're going to have to really develop, areas where we don't yet have the science. One, fusion. We have fission. There are some very fascinating breakthroughs in controlled thermonuclear fusion, not blowing up the world, but how do you harness this energy? We had Lawrence Livermore Lab, actually the National Ignition Facility, get more energy out than they put in. We have China now that's had a plasma at, I think, 100 million degrees Celsius for 117 seconds. So we're getting close to developing fusion. Why do you need fusion? Well, if you want to get to Mars and you don't want people stuck out there in zero or low gravity and being exposed to all that radiation, you want the trip to be short. You don't want it to be 6 months. And if you develop fusion propulsion for your rockets, you could accelerate at the rate of 1g, so the astronauts would be in constant gravity, and then decelerate at 1g, and your astronauts would have Earth gravity for the entire trip, and it would be much shorter, not 6 months, maybe a matter of weeks to get to Mars. So we need fusion. We also need lasers, and we need electromagnetic pulse, not as weapons, but as tools. Lasers are people think about laser surgery now. Isn't that much better than having them come with a chainsaw, right? It's very efficient, very small, very dense energy. We don't really have this technology yet fully developed. These are going to be huge science drivers for Earth. As we work on these things, what is it going to mean for the continent of Africa to have unlimited, massive amounts of energy from fusion? What is it going to mean in Bangladesh to have lasers that can do super advanced medical technology and industrial technology? Then also life in space, biology. And LaRouche said explicitly optical biophysics, the relationship between light, the relationship between frequencies and molecular activity. One thing that's not very well understood, but which is absolutely the case, is that there seem to be certain laws that apply in non-living matter, certain chemical reactions that occur in a certain way. But when it's in living matter, it's totally different. We don't really understand that. Why is that? Is there a question of tuning? Would we be able to cure all kinds of cancers because we discover the relationship between certain frequencies of light or sound or different kinds of waves and life? So we're going to have to make breakthroughs in this area. And then 4, which we're on the way to in China, just really kicked our butt again on supercomputers, because we're going to need computers that can deal with the mathematics for this. So these are the 4 areas of breakthrough. And then what he said, and I'll just go through these fairly quickly because my time is running out, but I want you to think about them. So the first phase of getting to Mars is we have to be able to get off of Earth. And LaRouche is saying, and we can, but he thinks what we need is a space station. He described it as being like a major railroad shipping place, and not the ISS is about 250 miles above our surface. He says this one's going to be 22,000 miles. So it's going to be a very big orbit where there's a lot of space, and we're going to have a lot of ability to move people back and forth from there and have stations in lower Earth orbit where people and goods can be shipped. He said what you want to have in your mind's eye is to actually build a manned colony on Mars. You want to get all the material you need to build that into Mars orbit. And that's going to be circling Mars, maybe some of it on the moon. Phobos, our dear friend Tom Weissmuller used to love talking about Phobos. LaRouche thinks we need a space station which is rotating again for the gravity question. So you have a station circling Mars, orbiting Mars, where you're delivering all this stuff so that you're ready then to send it down to the surface of Mars and start building. You have to get to that point. This he described as being a 40-year process. So we get off Earth, and he said when you do this, you're going to have these giant vessels that are larger than a freight container ship that are going to carry what you need to build on Mars. So we're going to have to start building these flotillas. And he said a lot of the construction, phase 2, is the industrialization of the moon. Why? Well, if you're going to move giant, heavy things, wouldn't it be better if you made them on the moon? If you make them on the moon, then it's only 1/6 of the gravity. It's easier to get them off there and get them moving. So you also need an energy grid on the moon. Well, China and Russia are planning to build a nuclear power plant on the moon by 2035. Now, we might have 5 inches of high-speed rail by then, if we're lucky. They're going to have a nuclear power plant. And he said you also have to create the conditions to grow food on the moon. And we know China did sprout some potato seeds actually on the far side of the moon. Apparently the lunar soil is really good for potatoes. That's what Kraft Erica said. So we'll have a bunch of Irish people, working on the moon. Then we're going to have the manned exploration of Mars. And unmanned, of course. We have a lot of things going to Mars now. Again, China's beating us. They're going to have very soon, I think, actually go to Mars and bring samples back to Earth. For us, we're not doing this for at least 4 years. But if we would work with them, we could do it sooner together. And then after the manned exploration of Mars, we're going to build, he says, now we're back to actually building the space. You can't build the space fleet until you have your industrial base on the moon. And once you've got your industrial base on the moon and you're able to move all this material, you're going to send flotillas of these giant freight ships in groups of 5 there. And then once you get all your equipment and everything on above Mars, then you're going to lower it and you're going to start building on Mars. And LaRouche makes the point that if you know how many people it takes, everyone ever look at Mission Control in Houston? I mean, there's a lot of people there, and you've got 3 little astronauts, and you got hundreds and hundreds of people on the Earth keeping them safe. So he said, we could have thousands of people on Mars, and you don't have to massively increase the large number of people that you have on Earth, coordinating, communicating, supplying, troubleshooting, et cetera. Ultimately, once you establish that you figured out how to create an atmosphere, and that's the other thing you're going to need for the lasers and the electromagnetic pulse and the fusion to create an atmosphere enclosed. You're going to have massive enclosed structures, and you're going to create an atmosphere in there. You're going to need huge amounts of energy. You need huge amounts of energy on Mars. He thinks that for people living there, you're going to be growing food and those things, that you probably should be planning that 500,000 people are going to be ultimately in this colony on Mars, because that's what you need for your society to function and for people to fulfill all these different functions and become self-sustaining. Now, this is, I think, really exciting. It also, I was thinking about it, if we have all those giant freight ships, we can take all this stuff from storage and send it to Mars. And I'm just kidding. I don't think it may work in the Martian climate. But it does, you realize what has been done to us is so evil and so destructive by this shift, the post-industrial environmentalist shift in the 60s. Stop growing, stop eating, stop consuming, get rid of your carbon footprint, consume less, and let's just juggle the money, the pie, right? There's this fixed pie, and there's only so much, and if someone else gets some, you won't get any. And it's a really satanic outlook because it limits everything. Whereas if you take a bold mission like Mars colonization, you are forced to draw on the resources and talents of everyone on the planet. You will not be overproducing. And it completely changes the outlook. And also, as every astronaut has said, when they get out in Earth orbit and they look back on Earth, they say, that planet is so small. How can it be that we can't figure out how to get along with each other? Thank you.
First, I want to do something that should be done in general, which is to thank our technical people, Dave DeBroad, Kynan Thistlethwaite, Art Murphy, for what they are going to be doing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to give you an idea about something that you should have an idea about, but because of the problem of earlier generations, you don't. 50 years ago, 60 years ago, people used to talk about walking off to look for America. That generation that went to do that, of which I am a part, unfortunately walked off the edge. The problem with doing that was that there was no edge, but they managed to find it. And as a consequence, nobody knows anything about America. First of all, America is not a place. So you can't find it if you go to look for it. Second of all, America is an idea. And the idea is not available in sense perception. If you aren't America, there is no America. It was established that way. Lyndon LaRouche, as some of you saw at the beginning, talked about John Winthrop, New England, and so on. We're going to do kind of a mugshots of the American system. And what we're talking about is something that it took people from that earlier generation a lot of work. The artifacts of what they did are in books. books like How the Nation Was Won, America's Untold Story, Graham Lowry. This book is about the period of 1630 to 1754, and what it talks about is utterly and thoroughly unavailable outside of in this book anywhere. That was Graham, a good friend of ours, one of our members. Treason in America, from Aaron Burr to Averell Harriman, Anton Chaikin. A story that many people think they know, but the way that it's told here is very different than the one that is talked about. Oh, and the book by Alan Salisbury, The Civil War and the American System. So what we're going to do, I'll reference Alan here in a minute. Alan, who is a member of our organization, is a member of the National Executive Committee of LaRouche's organization. Prior to that, an associate member, I'll put it that way, of the Black Panther Party, and an executive on Madison Avenue. And he rediscovered what was called the American system. There is a term, the American system, you can all Google, and you will be told something about it. But what you will be told is not the actual American system. That's Alan's picture on the back, and he rediscovered it. He was about 24 years old, 25 years old when he did that. And really, in one sense, that's the key story. So let's go to some of these pictures just to make people know. This is Benjamin Franklin. Now, everybody always sees him as an old man, but what people don't tell you is that Benjamin Franklin, at the age of 16, was sent to Philadelphia to create what was called the American Revolution later. He called it the junto, or the junta. I already knew what that word, look the word up. It says it means coup, you think. He was 16 years old when he did that. And he spent the next 54 years, he'd already qualified himself. He was already a writer, was well known in New England, but not by his name. He was known by the name Silence Dogood. He was 13 years old. He was writing these various editorials and articles. Everybody thought it was an old lady, but it was actually him. He often wrote, actually, articles in opposing himself, and just to get the discussions going. He understood what Socratic dialogue actually was about. So that's Ben Franklin. Let's go to the next one. This is a picture of Ben Franklin, the old man Ben Franklin, and to his right is Thomas Jefferson. In the middle is John Adams, and what you're seeing there under the desk are all of the rejected drafts done by Jefferson of the Declaration of Independence. The notion that somehow Thomas Jefferson came up with this out of his head. No, this was a process which at the time, when we got to 1776, there was a need to put a document together that was going to be revolutionary in its nature, not in its words. And that's the key thing about America. America is a revolution, but it is a revolution that is in the Declaration of Independence, not in the laws of the Constitution. In the preamble of the Constitution, yes. The American Revolution creates a circumstance where, as of 1776 through 1789, when the Constitution was created, you no longer have to overthrow a government. You have to take the principle of the American Revolution and realize it is always the overthrow of what came before. The American Revolution is based on the principle that you are supposed to, generation after generation, overturn the axioms of what is unjust that comes before. It is a perfecting process. There is no other nation on the face of the earth that has that as its constitution, its form. And that is one of the great problems of not teaching these sorts of things. Next. That's Alexander Hamilton. Now, by the time Alexander Hamilton was 23 years old, he was creating the economics of the American system. That is, as a military officer, a brigade officer, an artillery officer in the Revolution, he was writing up the economy of the American Revolution, something that he was in dialogue with Ben Franklin about. And this is contained in a series of documents, the four reports on manufacturers, the National Bank, the constitutionality of the bank, and public credit. He was the first Treasury Secretary, and it is that the United States is based on, not capitalism, not Adam Smith. Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, was written against the American Revolution. So when you read by various right-wing this, that, and the other, or left-wing this, that, and the other, that the United States is capitalist and it's somehow based upon Adam Smith, that is all bullshit, ladies and gentlemen. You are not based on that. You are based on the work of Alexander Hamilton and Benjamin Franklin. Next. That's Matthew Carey. Matthew Carey was a pamphleteer for Benjamin Franklin. He was recruited at the age of 16 to come out of Ireland, where he was already sort of a declared criminal, and to come and write for Benjamin Franklin, part of his printing operation, which Thomas Paine was also a part of. He was the person that began the attack on Adam Smith that was then taken up by, let's go to the next one, his son, Henry Carey. And these were the people who created the American system. The American system is against the British ideas of free trade, the British idea of slavery. No, the British were not the people that began the abolition of slavery. It was not true. It was the Americans, and it was Hamilton. It was an anti-colonial revolution. And yes, there were issues which we can take up if there are time at some point. But wait, let's go back to Henry Carey for a minute. Because Henry Carey wrote this book, The Slave Trade, Domestic and Foreign, Why It Exists and How It Is to Be Extinguished, which was written in 1853. This book caught the attention of a German then living in Manchester, England, by the name of Karl Marx. And it was with Henry Carey that Karl Marx was in dialogue. Marx was regularly published in the New York Tribune because Henry Carey was his economics editor. Carey struggled mightily, but failed to correct Marx on Marx's ideas about labor. Where Marx had an idea about an unending class struggle, Henry Carey told him, no, there is a harmony of interest. And is that harmony of interest? That's what America represents, not the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a disaster. It is the American Revolution, which is the revolution against colonialism. Next, Friedrich List, a German who was an American, lived down in Pennsylvania, Reading, Pennsylvania, and he worked with the Careys. And what he did was that he created, this book is called The National System of Political Economy. And their idea was to get rid of these, what you had, congestion pricing like you have here, or all these tolls between cities. Germany was never a nation until 1871. It was a set of principalities, and 300 of them. And if you went from one place to another, you had to pay tolls all over the place. He got rid of that. It was called a customs union. He also was the person who advocated and promoted the development of railroads. What's happening now in China, that comes from Friedrich List's work with the Careys. And of course, Paterson, New Jersey, where those first railroads were beginning, locomotives were being produced. So let's go to the next one. Henry Clay. Well, Henry Clay, there's a lot that one could say, but I'll just put it this way. If you look up Google, you'll see the American system is Henry Clay's idea. Well, there are three ideas that are relevant there. Tariffs, a national bank, and internal improvements. Now, you'll see that if you just look it up. But then that's the problem. It's not really the American system. And while we don't have time to go through each one of these individuals, what's important is that they were finding ways in the 1820s, the 1830s, after the revolution had begun to be compromised. They were trying to find ways of preserving and protecting the American Revolution and its revolutionary impact, because the revolution had enemies. We're not going to stop and talk about their enemies, its enemies now. I just want to indicate that. Let's go to the next one. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams Henry Clay was the Secretary of State for John Quincy Adams when he became the President of the United States in the 1824 election, winning that election. John Quincy Adams was a true son of the Revolution. He was born in 1767. He became a spy for the Americans in 1777 with his father going to Paris, but his father used him as a spy. He had great proficiency in languages. He spoke Russian, and he spoke German and Dutch, and Latin and Greek he had learned earlier, French, of course. He was the person that people associate with the Monroe Doctrine. But the most important thing to know about him is that he served as not merely the president, but after he left the presidency, came back into the Congress. He died on the floor of the Congress. His major fight in those years after he was president was the fight against slavery. And when people talk about his death was in 1848, Abraham Lincoln was one of his pallbearers. Let's go to the next slide. That's also Adams is an old man. Next. And Lincoln was the inheritor of that American system. His economics advisor was Henry Charles Carey. The battle was to try to bring the United States revolution to conclusion, for which a revolutionary party was created in 1856. It was called the Republican Party. Republican Party was a combination of the efforts of people like Lincoln and people like Frederick Douglass. Remember, if you look at the Lincoln-Douglas debates, you'll see that one of the major slanders against Abraham Lincoln is that he's the black Republican. So this is the sort of world we're in. Now, the Republican Party, let's go to the next slide. Here's somebody, well, that's Ulysses Grant. You should know him because he was the greatest general of the Civil War, not Robert E. Lee. And I think the proof is in the pudding on that one. So let's, but he's up here because he then became president. He was president for 2 terms, and people, of course, talk about the great corruption during that period. The most important thing that Grant did, among other things, was the destruction of the Klan, of the Ku Klux Klan, because the Ku Klux Klan was a rear guard. It was the Operation Gladio of the 19th century, for those of you who know what that is. The stay-behind operation that was put in, that was part of NATO in Europe in 1948, well, that's what the Klan was. The Klan was not just old Confederate soldiers. It was a conspiracy that was organized by British intelligence to try to disrupt the then just unified United States. And one has to understand something about the Second American Revolution, which this was. Let's go to the next slide. This is Congressman William Kelly. Don't know who he is, right? What I'm going to give you, he's from Philadelphia. He gave a speech in New Orleans, May 11th, 1867. Now, you got to understand, there's a lot of people with a lot of weapons in a place like that, and they're not necessarily that friendly to Northerners. He's giving this speech, and this is how his speech begins. He says, "In response to the invitation of your governor and the mayor of this beautiful city, I am here to counsel with you as to the best interests of our country. Let me, however, first congratulate you upon your enfranchisement and thank the loyal men among you without regard to race or color who during the late struggle braved the dangers of battle in defense of the old flag or quietly remained true to it amid the dangers which surrounded you, for the part that you took in my enfranchisement." Having addressed a large and enthusiastic audience in Memphis on Tuesday night, and standing in the midst of this brilliant scene in the city of New Orleans, I am at last able to proclaim that I am a free man in my native land, and may traverse its wide extent, carrying with me my conscience and convictions without fear of personal violence. This was impossible before the war. Are you understanding what he is saying? No one in America was free until the time of that war. And the people of the American system tradition understood that. That's what they were fighting for. They were not fighting for the freedom of black people. They were fighting for the freedom of all people, and it was only achieved then. But let's just get an idea of the image and the vision that these people had. He talked about a lot of things in his speech. Welcome among you the people of every clime and nation, and remember that the prosperity of the state is but the aggregate prosperity of the individual citizens thereof. And as this assurance thrills me that you will do this, the people respond to him in the crowd. I behold a vision grander than that of Columbus, for I know that behind the islands lies a broad continent sweeping from the rock-bound coast of the storm-lashed Atlantic up to the golden shores of the sleeping Pacific, and that from the Rio Grande River to the perpetual snows of Mount Hood, it is inhabited by one people who, though differing in origin, are homogeneous in language, thought, and sentiment, and who, though the citizens of many states, each having its own constitution, recognize as supreme one government, and that the freest yet devised by man. I cannot better illustrate the value of this unity than by pointing to the future of your own beautiful city, New Orleans. It is the entry point for the commerce of the Gulf, the trade of which proceeds under our bright flag. The river Mississippi that winds around you carries to the sea the waters of 60,000 miles of river course. The valley it drains will sustain a population of 500 million people. They will be free, intelligent, enterprising, and given to commerce, and your city will be the center of their great commercial exchange. But as I look through the vista of a brief future, the glories of the great cities of antiquity fade away, and Florence, Venice, and Genoa recur to me as but so many distant villages. Not Paris or London will be your equal. That is the America you never saw. 500 million people in the Mississippi River Basin. You want to understand the poverty of the lack of an understanding of the United States? Look at it. Because this idea of the American system is unknown to you. Let's go to the next one. These are all going to be very quick. Erasmus Peshin Smith, well, you've heard of Japan, Japanese economy. The Japanese economy was modeled on the American system, and this is the man that did that. We're not going to stop to say more, just want the mugshot to be known. Go look him up. Next. James Garfield, President of the United States, a preacher, a lawyer, a soldier, decorated soldier, proponent of the American system, assassinated in 1881. Why? Next. President William McKinley, president in 1896, proponent of the American system, assassinated in Buffalo. Why? Next. Franklin Roosevelt, Miami, 1933, February, almost assassinated. Why? Next. John Kennedy, President of the United States, a proponent of the American system as it was through Roosevelt, seen through Roosevelt's eyes, assassinated. Why? You will never find America unless you look within yourself. The day you decide that you are America, America will reappear. That is our task. That's why we're here today. And that's what we're here to ask you to help us rediscover.
Wow. Tough act to follow. That's good. So what I'd like to address is bringing this to a sort of different level in the 20th and 21st centuries with some of the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche, going through his 4 laws and what kind of economic thinking he applied to understanding the economy in a new way and what we should do with that today. So Trump's electoral victories, both of them, they represented a repudiation of many things: the prevailing order, the transatlantic world, perpetual war, pretty much anything you didn't like. You may have felt that you were connecting to the Trump campaign by taking it on through voting for him. Now, recognizing what's wrong is helpful. It's obviously not enough. So Trump is against the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Okay, he's against wokeness. He's against DEI. He's against the Department of Education. I could go on. What are some of the things that Trump is for? There are answers. What's his big economic policy? What does he love? Tariffs, big, beautiful tariffs that are going to bring in money like no one's ever seen before. That's his shorthand for I don't know how much, right? So when you're the president, you're not in a position of protest. You're not there to oppose things. Like, you know, that's Bernie Sanders' idea for the rest of his life. Perpetual opponent, right? The idea of actually becoming the president, I think, scared him so much that he let Hillary steal the election from him. Anyway, so what would you do if you were the president? Would you take a chainsaw to the economy like Milei and Musk are doing? Do you need something a little bit more refined? Sometimes you do have to pull weeds, but that's not enough to nurture your vegetables and flowers in your garden. There's more than that, isn't there? So among the failures in economic thought that are most contributory to people's just dismal economic thinking, especially among our experts, is the belief in money. The belief that you can value things in the economy with money. How much is something worth? You're perhaps expecting an answer in dollars if you ask that question. How much is this decision worth? How much is that policy worth? How much does it cost? Money, money, money. But the great discovery that first separated us entirely from merely animal life, it wasn't money. It was fire. So in the Greek telling of the myth of Prometheus, who is from anyway, it doesn't really matter. Prometheus stole from Zeus, you know, the chief god in Olympus. He stole fire, and he gave it to mankind. And it wasn't just fire. As the story goes, Prometheus brought arithmetic, knowing the seasons, how to use a sailing ship to cross water, domesticating animals for our use, the calendar so you know when to plant, poetry, medicine, all the gifts that separate us from the animals. This was the gift of Prometheus. That's the Greek story. Now, when we take a look at what that means, we have to look at different ways of thinking about what growth means, about what productivity is, and how do we measure that. So let's hear from Lyndon LaRouche briefly on how we go about doing that.
There's a problem in the United States as such, and the world as such also. And the problem here is we've got to increase the productivity per capita of the human population. It's not enough to get increase employment. You've got to increase the productivity per capita of the citizen. Without that, you cannot win.
So to measure this productivity, I want to take a look at a couple of different ways of thinking about change. Now, the most profound changes in human economy are the things that open up a new chapter in the book of human history, like adding a new dimension to space, like going from an n-dimensional manifold to an n+1 dimensional manifold. Fundamental, huge transformations. So let's take a look at, okay. Here there is a change. One of these came before the other. Is there anyone confused about which is the first image and which is the second? Okay, you're right, you got me. It's not the same dog. Okay, all right. Busted. So what kind of differences are there between these two pictures? What kind of changes? Can anybody name any specific changes that happen? Size, that's definitely the biggest change. It's a lot bigger. What else? Maybe looking a little older, the colors different, perhaps giving credence to Jose's hypothesis that it's not the same dog. Yeah, the big one's probably stronger. Say again? It's had more experience? Okay. Independence, right. So, these are, everything that was named was something, I believe, that both had, but one had more of. More experience, more size, more strength, more, I forget what other, independence. Now, how about this transformation in life? Again, you're welcome. Again, we've got a transformation over time. What are some of the ways this time lapse differs from the puppy turning into the dog? A change of form. Well, so how the butterfly compared to the caterpillar, if you're trying to say what's the biggest difference between them, so like with the puppy and the dog, age, size, what's the biggest difference between the caterpillar and the butterfly? How move? It flies, it has wings, it moves in a different way. So does it fly more than the caterpillar? Okay, does the caterpillar fly at all? All right, now the dog had a size that's bigger than the puppy, but the puppy had some size. So here's overall just an example to get your mind going about the difference between more than as opposed to more of. Wall Street, it thinks about more of. How can we make more money? The money they make, it's the same as the money they had before. Money, how do you increase your money? It's not a fundamental transformation like this. Unless maybe some images from the movie Alien might represent the kind of transformation that Wall Street causes businesses to undergo. So let me turn now to LaRouche's 4 laws. So there is a wonderful book here, The Vision of Alexander Hamilton, and it includes the 4 reports on manufacturing and banking and so forth that we've heard about. And at the end of the book, there is LaRouche's essay, 4 New Laws to Save the USA Now. Let me read from this. The only location for the immediately necessary action which could prevent such an immediate genocide throughout the transatlantic sector of the planet requires the US government's now immediate decision to institute 4 specific cardinal measures which must be fully consistent with the specific intent of the original US federal Constitution, as had been specified by US Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton when he remained in office. So here they are. 1, immediate reenactment of the Glass-Steagall Law instituted by Franklin D. Roosevelt without modification as to principle of action. 2, a return to a system of top-down and thoroughly defined national banking. 3, the purpose of the use of a federal credit system is to generate high productivity trends in improvements of employment with the accompanying intention to increase the physical economic productivity and the standard of living of the people and households of the United States. And 4, adopt a fusion driver crash program. The essential distinction of man from all lower forms of life is that it presents the means for the perfection of the specifically affirmative aims and needs of human individual and social life. Therefore, the subject of man in the process of creation as an affirmative identification. This is a permitted form of expression of human nature. So let's talk about what those mean. So first one was Glass-Steagall. Actually, I think we've So I already talked about this, but fundamentally banks, I think if we did a word association test and I say banks and the first word that comes to mind might not be a positive one. So now banks have a very useful role to play. They take what would be idle capital and they allow it to be lent out to do something productive. That's wonderful. Banks are good. It's great that you're able to get a loan and get your business going and then be more productive. Wonderful. The trouble is, that's really not what banks are into right now, is it? They'd rather you give them money and instead of lending it to someone to start up a business, they'd rather gamble with it, lose the money, and then go to the government saying, we just lost Harry's money. So you better bail us out or he's in trouble. Glass-Steagall ends that by saying the banks have got to choose. You want to gamble? Okay. You want to get involved in loans and so forth? Okay, pick one. Pick one. And then the taxpayers aren't on the hook for gambling. On national credit, let's think about some of the ways that China is paying for its infrastructure, for its development. Some of this is through direct government spending. It's also through policy banks. China has essentially state-run banks that don't have as their goal making the biggest financial returns possible, but of advancing the country's interests. So these banks will be more likely to give a loan to a company that's building up its factory to produce something for export, let's say, or for a company that wants to produce trains for the high-speed rail system and they need some new equipment and they want a loan. That's the kind of thing that China makes possible. Now, let me look at an example from US history, specifically Franklin Roosevelt's use of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. This is something that Hoover had set up to, it doesn't really matter. The way that Roosevelt used this was like a national bank. It dispersed more than $1 trillion in today's dollars of loans. And this was for building bridges, for building dams. The Tennessee Valley Authority, I think, was actually financed separately. That's even more lending for growth. Hospitals, schools, parks, so many things. Post offices. Now, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation loans overall were paid back. Not every one of them, but just looking at it as a financial institution, it came out okay. But even if none of the loans were paid back, it still would have made not money, but it would have made economic growth. Why? Because it made the country so much more productive. Studies of the Tennessee Valley Authority, which took the southeast part of the US, which was certainly the poorest region, and brought it upward by controlling floods and teaching agriculture and having electricity. Just the increased income tax attributable to that program was enough to pay for it. But also, everything was paid back as well. So sometimes things are economically beneficial, even if they're not financially beneficial. Economy is not about money. It is not about finance. So if you think about what we need today, it's an order of magnitude beyond what the RFC did in today's dollars. We have a terrible shortfall in terms of our infrastructure nationally. Where is our high-speed rail network, as was brought up? What's the condition of the subway systems? In fact, where are the subway systems? Why aren't there more of them? These are the kinds of things that we should invest trillions of dollars in, and they'll make the whole economy so much more productive. What makes China so productive? Is it because people there work for cheap? Maybe some years ago, yes, that was part of their competitive advantage for getting business. But how did China as a whole develop and become so wealthy, increasingly wealthy as it is today? They took that money that they were bringing in and they invested it. They didn't invest it in destroying Afghanistan, starting a war in Iraq, funding moderate rebels in Syria, throwing Libya into chaos, pouring weapons into Ukraine to try to attack Russia using Ukrainian people. China invested it in good things, and look where they're at today. The most high-speed rail in the world, Now, they are a very big country, but even if you look at it on a per capita level, I think they're only behind Spain in terms of high-speed rail. So the improvement in productivity, the improvement in the productive powers of labor, this is the source of economic growth. Let me read a quote from Hamilton's report on can't do two things at once, report on the subject of manufactures. He says, the annual produce of the land and labor of a country can only be increased in two ways. By some improvement in the productive powers of the useful labor, or by an increase in the quantity of such labor. With regard to the first, the labor of manufacturers being capable of greater subdivision and simplicity of operation than that of farmers, manufacturing is susceptible in a proportionally greater degree of improvement in its productive powers, whether to be derived from an accession of skill or from the application of ingenious machinery. How do you increase productivity? Do more or do better or do both. More on manufacturing and machinery from Hamilton. The employment of machinery forms an item of great importance in the general mass of national industry. 'Tis an artificial force brought in aid of the natural force of man, and to all the purposes of labor, it is an increase of hands, an accession of strength, unencumbered by the expense of maintaining the laborer. If you want more hands to help you, you can get people, or you can enlist the help of coal. The steam engine completely transforms the economy. So everything changes together. Productivity is about the whole country, the whole economy. And that's because not only do new technologies or new infrastructure networks change everything that you do, changes your conceptions of space and time and how far away other cities are and what kind of processes you can do, and if you can count on having electricity and siting a factory and being able to move your goods in and out. That's all true. Even for the aspects of the economy that seem like they didn't change, they did, because they're in a different space. Let's say there's a farmer that hasn't really changed much the way they do things. Maybe they make organic veggies for a farmer's market and people don't want them to change, okay? Well, what are the people eating that food doing in a society where we're building a high-speed rail network, rebuilding schools, and developing defenses against asteroids? Versus if those vegetables are eaten by Wall Street types. The value of that farmer's work has changed because of who's eating it. So you change the value of everybody's life when you have a national mission. Specifically, let me end with talking about fusion in space. So nuclear fusion is based on the fact that in the atomic nucleus, so a molecule is made of several atoms. Examples of molecules are methane, natural gas, or sugar, something like that. The amount of energy in the size of a molecule compared to the nucleus of an atom is about 100,000. 100,000 times smaller in the nucleus than the atom. The amount of energy in that nucleus compared to the molecule is 100,000 times greater. So in 100,000th the space, you get 100,000 times more power. This is really a no-brainer in terms of where to go with the energy technologies of the future. And with nuclear fusion, which has been mentioned, we are getting closer and closer to it. We'll be able to transform our relationship to water. Desalination won't be expensive. We'll change our relationship to materials. Refining ores will be much easier. We'll change our relationship to trash. We'll be able to recycle everything into its elements, presuming that the trash is worth enough. We'll be able to mine landfills and get our rare earths there, this sort of thing. Total change. And it's been a choice, a repeatedly made choice not to have this breakthrough. How much money has been wasted on, rooftop solar panels? How much in government funds, windmills, this sort of thing? More importantly, how much just hasn't been spent? It's been underfunded deliberately. So let me end with the strategic defense of Earth. Diane had brought up this asteroid that last month seemed like it had a chance of striking the Earth. It seems very remote now, but it still might hit the moon. So anyway, over 1% odds of that. So that's still kind of high. The question is, how do we find these things? What do we do about it? And the only way you can get out there to change the course of an asteroid that's coming at you, if you don't have much warning, you have to have nuclear power for this. You need a nuclear rocket to get out there quickly. You need nuclear explosives to transform, to change its orbit or break it up. You can't do it with chemical rockets, impossible. So if you want to talk about a Department of Defense, if you want to talk about working with other countries on defending ourselves, we don't need to defend ourselves from Vladimir Putin. We do need to defend ourselves from asteroids. And that's something that we could definitely work with Russia, China, and other countries on. So having a mission, my final point, having a mission, having a goal, transforms the meaning and the emotional experience of every life in the country. Think of the amount of good you do by bringing into being a mission orientation that sweeps the US population and beyond that forward. It's really a great opportunity. And that's the most human or emotional aspect of growth. It's all based on what makes us different from the animals and based on that character of reason that all of us have in common as human beings. That's what I'd like to say. And we will now turn to a courageous young man who is working to make that a reality. Jose Vega.
All right. I hope to, in my presentation to you all, it's a little odd. I think this might be one of the first presentations we're doing of the year. So, okay, thank you. Is this better? Great. I want to show that there are real people who suffer the consequences of our inactions for not actually implementing the plans that Jason just went through, or for not understanding what America is as Dennis was just going through it. Can we bring up the first slide? So I know a lot of people look at my pin here. I don't know what was funny about it, but it's a kefir with a little watermelon in it. Some people know that the watermelon is the colors of the Palestinian flag. And if you can go to the next slide, I got it at the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. I was the guest of honor of Dr. Mark Perlmutter, who had invited myself and my colleague Morgan Blythe and Dr. Mark Perlmutter's girlfriend Amy to come. And one of the things they gave us there was this pin. For people who don't know who Dr. Mark Perlmutter is, you can go to the next picture. Dr. Mark Perlmutter is a Jewish American doctor from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He's an orthopedic surgeon, and he was trained as a trauma surgeon. And he has been in every war zone that you can think of in the last 20 years or so. He was in Haiti when the earthquakes happened. He was in Ukraine after the war broke out. He was in Ground Zero on 9/11. And he was in Gaza after the war broke out. He is still in Gaza right now. He went back. He came back, actually, and he is there now. He is there with our friend Dr. Feroz. Dr. Feroz and Dr. Mark Perlmutter have both supported my campaign in many ways. And when they needed a place to give a talk, after being canceled at Mount Sinai, we found them a place. You know, the LaRouche people found them a place to speak at. And so I wear this pin because I'm not a doctor. I'm sure a lot of people in this room may not be doctors. And yet, these two men, Dr. Feroz and Dr. Mark Perlmutter, who are not political, I would assume that everybody here is to some degree political, decided that they needed to take what they are good at, which is being trauma surgeons, because Dr. Feroz is also a trauma surgeon. He's also been in a lot of these conflicts, and they needed to do what they do best. They see children dying in Gaza. And now Mark Perlmutter, by the way, as he says, he went to Gaza the first time believing what the propaganda was about the Palestinians, that they're all terrorists, this and that, and they use children as, human shields. He didn't care. He had a mission, which was, I have to go and I have to help people. And they are not political. I really want to stress that. They are not political at all. If you talk to them, it's just like, Dr. Feroz, he knows what's up to date. He listens to people like McGregor, Scott Ritter and stuff. But Mark is just like this great guy who just wants to help people. And when they got over there, they tell you, what they saw, which was 95% of the people they were treating were children. So this pin is a reminder to me that even though I may not be a doctor, I have a responsibility to them. I have a responsibility to the children they treat, and I have a responsibility to stop oppression wherever it may be on this planet. And as Dr. Mark Perlmutter has said before, that his neighborhood does not begin or end at Rocky Mount, North Carolina. His hometown, that may be, but he doesn't just serve Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He will go wherever he is needed. That is his community. And that is true for us here in this room too. So I am running for Congress in the poorest congressional district in the country. And I also get told often that I should only focus on the needs of the Bronx. What do the people of Palestine get told? Should they only focus on Palestine? Of course not. That would be insane. Earlier today, I had what I would call a dialogue, although it wasn't really a dialogue. Somebody who says they supported my campaign was sending me a barrage of text messages saying that I should be more moderate because, I don't want to upset some people who may be more sympathetic to Israel and may not agree with, what I'm saying about the children dying in Palestine. I want to make it very clear that I am not somebody who will work with people who think that people are only inherently selfish. I get it told constantly that people in the Bronx only care about the prices of eggs, only care about their groceries, and only care about getting their rent paid. I get that told often, and I think it is one of the most disgusting things you can even think about another human being, and it's often more a reflection of the person saying it than it is about the people of the Bronx. So I'm making that clear right now. If you think people only care about egg prices, I don't want to be near you. So how do we actually get the change that we are talking about here, and how is my campaign a vehicle for that? Well, one example I want to illustrate, and don't go to it just yet, but I'll ask you to move the slide in just a second, is we are bringing Socratic dialogue, whether by force or by choice, in the streets. Now, here's what I mean. One of the things that Socratic dialogue aims to do is to increase positive tension in the minds of people, whether it's the person you're having a dialogue with or the people around who are listening. That's where the tension exists. You want to raise this tension. You want to highlight an absurdity. All right, so now you can go to the next slide. So this is Jamal Bowman and Breonna Joy Gray. And there was something funny that happened recently. He went on her podcast and basically was talking about the so-called adversarial left. And you can go to the next slide. So he was complaining that he didn't want to work with people like Breonna Joy Gray or Jimmy Dore because they only cared about being right. But as I was listening, he said something interesting. He said the adversarial left at that time was against specific people. And listen, if that's the way you want to go about things, that's your choice. But just know how it's going to be received by someone like me. I can't speak for myself, but I can't speak for anyone else, but I can speak for myself. Like, someone came to one of my town halls to call me out about something. Maybe it was about the Ukraine war or whatever. He just starts yelling. And I'm like, hold on, give me a second. Let me finish and then we can talk. We can build and we can figure this thing out. But if all you're going to do is protest, just trying to be right, or just win an argument, or be loud and mad, nasty and disrespectful, like, that's not productive. I would understand that if that's what I did, but I actually have, do we have the video of me doing the intervention? So this is September 19th of 2022. And this is what he is referring to.
Do more on climate. We could do more on lowering prescription drug costs. We could do more on gun control. We could do more with regard to the Black agenda. We can do more.
Congressman, you're a hypocrite because you are funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They are wearing the Black Sun symbol, the same symbol that the Buffalo shooter used, the same symbol that the person who almost killed the vice president in Argentina used.
Thank you so
say you
much.
want to advance the Black cause, but you are funding the same people who kill in the name of white supremacy.
This is the foundation.
For the Bronx.
This is the foundation of our democracy, freedom of speech.
You choose to fund Nazis.
Stick around and I will have a conversation with you right after the end, but let me get to the conclusion. Stick around. I promise. I got you. The foundation of our democracy is freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. So we appreciate that, and brother, I will talk to you at the end.
So the truth is, he did talk to me at the end, and I do recount a little bit of his experience on because Breonna Joy Gray invited me on her show to talk more about this. So there was a part with a prisoner, which I won't get into now, but I was able to put this prisoner who was being mistreated in upstate correctional facility on the phone with the congressman, who then the congressman said, we're going to do whatever we need to do to make sure you're fine. And so finally I was like, okay, now Congress, it was like took half an hour for him to get to me. You're funding neo-Nazis, you're supporting this war in Ukraine, my congressman, and then he gets upset with me because I'm not a constituent. He says, wait, I'm not even your congressman? Like, no, but Richie Torres is, but you and I both know he sucks. and he just says, yeah, but come on, man, you can't do it like this. You got to pull me to the side and you got to da-da-da-da-da. And I said, okay, but the point still stands. You are funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's hypocritical to what you say you want to do. And his only response was, well, we're going to keep doing the things we said we're going to do on the things that we want to do. And then he just walked away. I'm not joking. I'm not kidding. I swear. I wrote this down when I first did this. So, gave me a Kamala Harris answer, basically. So let's go to the next slide here. So I know a lot of people have been seeing this recently. I'm sorry if it's hard for the people in the room to see. This is Bernie Sanders. Today, AOC and I had 34,000 people come out in Denver. It is the largest rally that I have ever had. And it tells me that the American people will not allow Trump to move us into oligarchy and authoritarianism. We will fight back. We will win. You can go to the next slide. So this is part of a tour series that Bernie Sanders is doing called Fighting Oligarchy. Where we go from here, town hall discussions with Bernie Sanders. See, the problem is that the Democratic Party has a problem right now where they know that there are people who are disheartened, who have no faith in the party at all whatsoever after the loss of Kamala Harris. I think there was like a CNN Gallup poll that said that the approval rating of the Democratic Party is at an all-time low. It is at 29 or 27%. Nobody likes the Democratic Party, even Democrats. So, but what is Bernie Sanders and AOC actually doing? Are they really going to try and, fight back against the oligarchical faction in their party? No. We're not going to let Trump beat us. We're not going to let Elon Musk, take our Social Security and our Medicaid. So in 4 years, everyone needs to vote Democrat again. That's what they're doing. They are sheepdogging people back into the Democratic Party. And I'm raising this because now is the time for there to be an independent movement of people who are dissatisfied with the country as a whole. Do not kid yourselves. Republicans are not happy. Democrats clearly aren't happy. But Republicans aren't happy either. Nobody in this country is fundamentally happy about the direction that the country is taking right now. And nobody is going to believe or buy, of course, unless you're one of the 34,000 people that just maybe have schadenfreude and like pain over and over again, or what? Or got paid to go, But the thing is, people want some kind of hope right now. And people are legitimately afraid of President Trump and Elon Musk and so on. But the question is, what are people prepared to do? First, let me tell you what I am not going to do. Go to the next slide, please. This is Isaiah Martin. He was born in 1998, just like me. And he is running as a Democrat in some seat that's up for grabs in a special election right now. He says, my name is Isaiah Martin, and I'm running for Congress. We can't solve today's problems with yesterday's politics. Repost and follow if you're ready to send Donald Trump a message that Democrats are ready to fight back. So this is supposed to rile up people and keep them in this same two-party modality. So I looked this guy up, and you can go to the next slide, and this is what I see. Since our puppet president is too weak to say it, I will. It's been 3 years since Russia started this war with Ukraine. If they want it to end, Putin can get the GTFO out of Ukraine. It's that simple. So this is who because the thing is, they understand that the people who run the Democratic Party and the people who run the sheepdogging know that people are hungry for young people to be in politics as long as they don't deviate from the message. So this guy, Isaiah Martin, of course, is right on the message. And then just one more, just to really kind of underscore the point. I'm going to Congress to be a brick wall to Donald Trump's anti-America agenda. My message, hands off our stuff. No cuts to Medicaid, no cuts to Medicare, no cuts to Social Security, no compromises on that. No means no. All right, we can put the slides down for now. There's one more I have, but I'll bring that at the end. All right, so where do we actually go from here? Why do I bring this up as an example of what I am not going to do? We are in round 2 of my campaign, and I do see things a little differently now. I want to make it clear to people that we are not running against Richie Torres. I mean, we are. He is currently the incumbent. He may run for governor. He may not. I don't care who they put on that ballot. We are not running against them. Now, what do I mean? This isn't about who we are against. I don't care what corporate suit they put in there. What I am really trying to do is to make sure that there isn't an inch on this planet that has anyone living on it in poverty. That's what we're running for. That's what we are building. So let them run Richie Torres. Let them run Jamal Bowman. I don't care. We are not a negative campaign. If we get Richie Torres out of there, that is incidental to what we are really trying to do. We are not just trying to put our boxing gloves up and, imagine one guy. That's part of it, but that's not what we're trying to do. I want it so that by the year 2099, poverty is studied in a textbook. It is a figment of people's imaginations and something that is only studied in the past. And it will begin in the Bronx. Because the Bronx, what we're going to do with the Bronx is we're going to flip it from the poorest congressional district in the country to the most scientifically advanced part of the world, where anybody who wants to learn advanced engineering can come and get it and get the skills they need so they can disseminate it. in their neighborhoods, in their countries, in their states, wherever they are, they can come to the Bronx, get a real education, and bring it back and make the world a better place. But how do we actually create the change in the country? I know a lot of you know me from my interventions, which highlights the absurdity of what whoever I'm yelling at is saying, and or whatever they're promoting. And these videos do go viral, like really viral. Millions of people, not just in the United States, not just in my district, but around the world, watch them. But why is this a valid form of politics in our world today? Because the interventions that we have had, not just me, are a form of Socratic dialogue. Whether you are yelling at a politician for the world to see and you undress them, or you are having a one-on-one discussion, you are raising the positive tension in the minds of the people who are listening to the person you are talking to. And in that tension is where the change is. That's where you find your allies. That's where you find your support. You will find people who will agree with you or don't agree with you and still decide to help you because they know that you mean well. That's why I work with this organization. That's why I have dedicated my life to these principles. And it is a shame that we haven't actually implemented any of what Lyndon LaRouche and this organization has tried to do for the last 50 years. No, seriously, when I was in high school, I was thinking I might just make movies, I think it's a crime that people have to sacrifice their lives now to ensure that the world can be a better place, but it has to be done because that's where we are now. And that's why I do what I do. And I'm looking for people to join me in that fight and help me in that. Whether you're here in the room or whether you're watching online, I need your help so we can make the world a better place now.
So we can take questions. I just want to say a couple things before we do that. One, we didn't actually touch on the LaRouche case. And I do want to say that everything that we've said is not by any means to imply that it's a hopeless situation with the Trump presidency, but we have to realize we are the ones who are responsible to make something of this. Take, for example, the release of the 80,000 files on the Kennedy assassination. Now, I know the New York Times, the New York Post, and everyone rushed to say, oh, there's nothing there, and what we're all going to learn is how Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. And I doubt it. I think there's a reason why probably the FBI, CIA, and everyone else was trying to suppress these files for all those years. This is an important blow to the treason apparatus that has had us in a succession of wars, and the apparatus that put Lyndon LaRouche and a couple dozen of our associates in prison, some people for 10 and 11 years. And as Ramsey Clark said, these are book people. LaRouche wrote thousands and thousands and thousands of pages and documents dedicated to the development of every inch of this planet, and as you heard, about half of our solar system. What was threatening about that? What's threatening is that you inspire people to not be slaves and to demand that they have a right to develop their God-given talent and creativity and live as human beings. And that was considered too much of a threat. So when he was a presidential candidate, 400 FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, armored vehicles surrounded his home with the intent to assassinate him. Reagan, with whom LaRouche was working at the time as Reagan's back channel to the Soviet Union to negotiate on laser defense against nuclear missiles. This was done by Bush William Weld behind Reagan's back. LaRouche got a telegram to Reagan, who was on his way to meet with Gorbachev in Reykjavik, Iceland, and Reagan called it off. Thank God no one was killed, but then they raided the offices. It's a long fight. I'm not going to go through all of it. But interestingly, many of even the same individuals that went after LaRouche have been involved in trying to eliminate Trump for the peace question. Robert Mueller was the guy who first indicted LaRouche. Roy Godson, I think he was on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. He came up in the trials. Look at the Bush family, the Cheney family. It's very much there. That's not to say, as you've heard us say, that all the policies coming out of this group are going to work. Our point is that it's like someone took a giant spatula with an encrusted, greasy frying pan and they dislodged a bunch of crud. That's useful. But then what? How do you get something good out of this? How do you take the fact that maybe the same locked in crud that put you in jail and shut down your newspaper and all of that isn't going to be able to do it? How do you then move to get the positive policy? That's why I chose from being a U.S. Senate candidate to become president of the LaRouche Organization for the United States, because I see an opportunity right now, if we get ourselves organized, that we can get a lot of policies for the good passed, even if the people that we get to pass them don't understand why they're good. And that is what we have got to get done. And that being said, the last thing I want to say before we open it up for questions for anyone here is that on the back table there is literature published by LaRouche and the LaRouche Organization. Please donate to the LaRouche Organization for the literature. Take extra literature. There's a lot of material there. We need funds. We do not get secret dark money. We are not on the whatever it would be, Christmas, I guess it would be the Hanukkah list of Miriam Adelson. We are not funded that way. So people can donate and help us in that, and please do so at the end, and you will get access to LaRouche's daily or weekly intelligence service, which is fantastic. So that's all I want to say. So I am happy now to take questions. If you want to ask questions, please come to the microphone. If you come to the microphone, you will be visible to the online audience. I know there are some people here who don't want to be visible to the online audience. So in that case, if you want to, right? Yeah, you can yell and not come forward. But otherwise, please come to the mic so they can hear you. Yes, do you want to please come up? You want to stay there? Go. Okay, yell.
With this recognizing the moment, we need to unify, and I believe that it's important to unify and get people from different spectrums to fight. And I've been paying attention to Shama Sawan, which is an ex-Seattle City Council. She had 10 years of experience with great results fighting the fight, and now she's working with workers strike back. So I think my invitation is to reach to them, work with them, and collaborate with them. I think it's great work, and they're reaching workers, trying to unify workers, all islands, or for different, just unified workers.
So just for the people who are out there listening, the discussion is the question of uniting to get policy, and I know her this, but what is her name again? Kashama Sawan in Washington State, who has been running for office and is collaborating with all kinds of people. And the question is, should we reach out to her, work with her? I'm not opposed to working with anyone, but Dennis or Jose, do you want to say something about that? Or, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
What else? Yes. Go ahead. Oh, and then Mike. Okay.
Yeah, hi. I think it's pretty simple. I hate to say this, it's like a mic drop comment. 3 companies, computerized voting machine companies, now count 90% of our votes in secret with privately owned proprietary software we the people cannot look at. So election after election, the more corporate conservative candidate wins, despite the fact that we the people all want universal health care. Doesn't happen. And anybody elected who gets over that hurdle is not going to talk about computerized election theft because they let them in the club. So this freedom-loving, independent, free speech-loving country goes ever rightward because the votes are counted in secret. We need hand-counted, hand-marked paper ballots like most of the world, or we will continue to slip into this right-wing nightmare. It's the voting.
I want to say to the people online what you just said, which is that the problem is you have 3 companies that control 90% of the way that the votes are counted, and that people who get elected are not allowed, don't address this because the reason they got elected is that they became part of that operation to win the election. Do you want to say? I have something to say about that, but if you...
Yeah, we don't vote anymore, basically. Since
Correct.
the HAVA Act of 1982, which brought in computers based on the hanging
The
chads.
HAVA Act, Help Americans Vote Act,
Right.
which is a complete fraud.
Because the hanging chads were improperly cut computer cards, so they hang. They set us up to have a non-transparent voting system. So we don't know who really wins. In election after election, the more conservative candidate is chosen by these private corporations. Why is the heart of our will about how we live in the hands of private companies? Why is that?
Right. So I would like to address that because when I ran against Schumer in 2022, I had the interesting, first of all, to get on the ballot in New York, because that's another way of controlling the elections. They tripled the signature requirement for independents and minor parties who don't have a big machine, who don't have zillions of Wall Street dollars, and who are blacked out in the press. We turned in 68,000 signatures, and I became the only independent candidate to get on the ballot the first time that this happened. They wouldn't let me in the debates. Well, election night rolls around, and I'm watching my vote slowly go up to 57,000 votes. And I'm thinking, maybe they'll let me get to 68,000. That was at least no, go to bed. The next morning, I get a phone call. Hey, Diane, we saw you got 29,000 votes. And I said, well, I had 57,000 when I went to bed. And yeah, right. And I had a friend in France who was actually started taking screenshots. The first screenshot we have is at 54,000 because we didn't expect it to go backwards, right? So I watch his screenshots through the night, 54,000, 53,000. The more votes that come in, the fewer I have. And since it's not an election day, it's a season. So they get to count them. And we figured out a bit of what was working. My husband was in Germany at the time. So I said, can you start taking screenshots of the counties? Because what happened in the county where I live, Rockland County, I had 5.8% of the vote election night, which is what the one opinion poll that mentioned my name said I had, which is a big deal in the state of New York as an independent to get 5.8%. So 6,212 votes election night. The next morning, I get up and say, let's look at Rockland County and see if I even got to 6%. Well, the next morning, my vote in Rockland County was 277 votes. I know. I had 0.2%. I went to the Board of Elections and I said, I want a time-stamped record of, like, when did my vote start going down? They had already reversed the whole thing. But on the sheet that I got from them, it said blank vote. That is, people who went to vote in 2022 as the governor, right, who voted for governor but didn't vote for U.S. Senate. 6,212 votes, the exact number of what I had the night before. So that's when I called my husband. I said, look, you got to look because they're going to do this, because they're not done, because Suzanne, my campaign manager, had called Albany. And Albany already election night said they disregarded the county totals. They said I had 25,000 votes in the state. So on Wednesday morning, I had 29,000. So I knew I still had to lose 4,000 more as they continued counting them. And sure enough, we found the other counties where my vote, went down. And then what I looked at afterwards is I discovered 40 out of 62 counties And New York City is a whole different system, so it doesn't count. But 40 of the 62 counties, my vote and the blank vote were exactly identical and swapped. Something statistically impossible, and meaning, by the way, that I had well over 100,000 votes in 2022. Now, this time what they did, because I had an army of supporters ready to take screenshots and watch my vote go down and make sure. So this time what they did is they just flatlined me. No matter what it was counted anywhere, I had 0.5% the whole night, all the time. So we went door to door in my district, because to keep my vote so low, they had to give me 0 to maybe 5 votes in every election district, what would be called precincts in other states. So we went door to door canvassing non-party affiliated voters in my street. My precinct said I had 5 votes, and I knew of 3 of them already from my house and the guy across the street. So I said, well, let's just see, how we spent an hour, we talked to 6 independent voters and found 3 more votes. And I'm convinced now, looking at what the blank vote was for the state, that this time I may have actually had 365,000 votes, between 4.5% and 5%. My vote was probably actually 10 times what they gave me. And it's right, and they do it. And in New York, they do have paper ballots inside the machines, but you are not allowed to look at them. And then they give you a scan, and even if you're a write-in candidate, you only have access to the scanned picture. So you're absolutely right. And one last thing I want to say about this, part of the reason for stealing the vote in this massive, what's the point? I didn't win. Maybe I had 5% of the vote. Why do they have to say I have 0.5%? Because they have to silence your voice, and they also have to convince the population that you are the only person in your neighborhood who thinks like you. So it's part of the news media brainwashing is also the election fraud. It's a way of making the population feel that anyone who doesn't like war and genocide is really alone, and everyone else in your town thinks exactly the same way that they see in the New York Times and NBC, et cetera, and it's just not true. But we don't know because we don't see the vote. So absolutely, we need same-day count in the polling place in front of people, the vote, and I have many more stories, but I won't go through here, but it's amazing what I discovered trying to pursue this. So yes, Mike, and I don't have to answer everything, so do you want it to? What? Okay. Oh, good.
Yeah, I'll come up here. Oh.
Great. Is that on, Dave?
Is this on?
It's not going to be in the room.
Oh, it's just online?
It's in the,
all right.
Good, thank you.
So thank you for having me here today. It's been a lovely afternoon with wonderful ideas being presented. My name is Michael Hazard. I'm a federal defense attorney, and I work in the area of computer law. I recently represented Roman Sterlingov, who's been wrongfully convicted of operating Bitcoin fog, and it's the same kind of battle that I've been facing, that Diane's been facing with her election. So I'm here to ask, what is the LaRouche organization's policy or ideas towards Bitcoin and decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, which, if you know anything about DAOs, are a great tool to combat this kind of corruption that happens in voting systems, because everything becomes transparent, like Bitcoin, transparent on the blockchain. Like Bitcoin, the government has actively been trying to silence people and companies that are doing things that are transparent in order to keep their power. So I'm wondering, to me, from what I'm hearing today, it sounds something that is completely in line with the values in this room, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this.
All right, well, I'm glad you asked, and I'm glad I didn't have to speak on this at the Bitcoin crypto ball where I met you, because actually I'm very opposed to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, because I think it's not about money. Now, what you're saying about blockchain is interesting, because from my understanding, and you might know better, when Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe were talking about cleaning up the voting system, they are whistleblowers from the NSA, if you don't know those names. And they said that they had a system by which they could straighten out all the election rolls, et cetera, which I think would in part be relying on the technology that you're talking about.
Decentralized ledgers recording everybody's vote, and like a Bitcoin address, you can be identified easily as an actual voter who has the right to vote, and your vote can be stored in a transparent way.
That's, I don't know this, but someone who knows more about it should say more. And Jason, or what do you? I just need to say something. Oh. Okay. Yeah. He wants to say something to him, and then. Yeah.
In a country where.
Okay. Good. Okay. Good.
And in a country where a private Federal Reserve is able to print as much money as they want, why would you be opposed to Bitcoin that has a 21 million cap?
I'm totally opposed to the Federal Reserve, so I'm
Well,
opposed
Bitcoin's
to.
the antithesis of that. So
No, you need a government. You need a national bank. You really do, and we have to straighten out the elections so we can actually have a national bank that's accountable, as it says in our Constitution, where you have a Congress that was actually elected that you can trust.
and transparently elected as well.
Correct.
So we need transparent voting, and we also need transparent finances.
Yes,
And blockchain
yes.
technology has the ability to make those things transparent.
Right, and that being said, on the Bitcoin crypto, where we have severe and deep disagreements, does not mean that I think that Romanoff, is that his name?
Oh, Roman Sterling.
Roman Sterling, yeah, should be in other words, these kind of political persecutions are really outrageous. So I want to also say that for the record. And I'm really glad you came. And there is a use for this, I think. But I don't know what Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe did at the NSA, but I believe their idea for cleaning up the elections was based in part on this technology.
And I think it's really important that this technology comes around and is used in that way as well. For people who don't know, Roman Sterling was convicted of operating Bitcoin fog. So when you can conduct a Bitcoin transaction on the blockchain, there's 5 pieces of information that are stored in the public ledger. Your address as the sender, your address as the recipient, the transaction ID, the value, and the date and time. So a lot of people who are trying to do suspicious things using Bitcoin are seeking more privacy. You know, a lot of people are also not committing any crimes and just don't want people to be able to analyze their financial information on the blockchain. So they want to use something like a mixer, which scrambles up the sending and receiving addresses so that your financial transactions are private. Now, the government doesn't like that, so they went down and tried to take down the operator of Bitcoin Fog. The problem is that they got the wrong guy, and they just took down a user of Bitcoin Fog. So now we have an innocent person who's, has been sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison, and we're working on his appeal right now. But, it's led me to the conclusion that when you scratch a liberal, you watch a fascist bleed. And what the Democrats have done, particularly against open source technology, decentralized autonomous organizations, is detrimental to the entire country and how we're going to be embracing economics in the 21st century.
Yes, okay, now he wants to address something. Thanks.
I just want to address the other question, and it's related to this one. Here's what we need to do. We need to find a couple of small cities, towns, where we can convince, or they may already find people that are convinced, when the city council, mayors, to volunteer that their cities will conduct paper ballot elections, and that they will organize the local high schools and the PTAs to be the patrollers of that election process, because the elections are supposed to be the people. So they should patrol the process. Now, here's what this is. This is a way of revisiting the old civil rights movement, because what you're talking about here is a violation of voting rights, the actual violation, not all of the technical stuff which people like to talk about. But the fact is, see, in a large city, it's a different thing. We'd have to decide how you would handle that problem. That's a different problem. The first thing you have to do in America is to demonstrate to people that what Diane said is actually happening. See, there are a lot of people that say it's happening, but demonstrating it is another thing. See, everybody knew that racism was a problem in America if they looked in 1953, 1954. Demonstrating what that problem was and causing that problem to come into national prominence was a completely different thing. Because you had to demonstrate it in a way which allowed everybody to see that there was clearly an injustice going on. That's why nonviolence was so important at that point. But in this case, see, because people often talk about, and since 1976, the people in the LaRouche organization have been aware of vote fraud. Very aware. Okay? There's vote fraud in the 1976 election, which was quite extensive. When we found that we proved, and it was acknowledged by the state Supreme Court in the case of Ohio in 76, they acknowledged that we had proven that there was fraud, but we had not proven that there was sufficient fraud to overturn the presidential election. At that moment, I knew what I was dealing with, because why should our organization have to prove that there was enough fraud to overturn the election? We weren't a board of elections. We're just supposed to prove that fraud is there. Once that's acknowledged, then the administrations of the state are supposed to intervene to deal with it. So from 76, I'll just say, we were, at least I was, and many of our members were completely aware there was no such thing as just elections from that time, including when somebody that you like gets elected. It's not just in those cases either. And it will never be back to that. You won't get it back by doing what you're talking about, not because what you're talking about is wrong, but because you must force, well, people have to volunteer. You can't force freedom on people. By definition, right? So they have to decide, they actually want to challenge this. And if you got 2 or 3 cities in America, 6,000 people cities, 10,000 people cities, to simply say, you know what? We don't like any of this stuff with these machines. We're not even talking about whether the machines are wrong, right, up, down, right, left. We just think the people should vote with a paper ballot. And we think that young people who have no relationship to their government, don't even understand, either never read the Constitution, can't read the Constitution, or think the Constitution is subversive, right? They have no relationship to it. We think they should be brought into this process. So I wanted to take this because often this is a matter that has irritated the hell out of many people correctly who've been just completely shot down for decades. But nobody has stepped up to actually challenge it. Because if you challenge that, watch what will happen in any city where you try to do that. You will find that the press will come down on those people like nobody's business as soon as they say, we volunteer to do this. And now that's what we have to do so that people can understand where they're actually living, what they're actually living under. The American people have not faced that. Some people have faced it. This is what we have to force, and we have to find ways, some of them taking from the past, right, to create a spotlight where no one can avoid the fact that no American today votes freely.
So one last, Art, is that, or who are you pointing at? Oh, hi. Hi there. Do you want to yell?
Can I have one question, please?
Yes, absolutely. The mic is on the live stream. Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Dan, for your invitations.
No, it doesn't work in here. It's for the people online.
Yeah.
So just speak loudly
I will.
so they
Yeah,
can
sure.
hear you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. This is Abdul. I'm from Patriots of Bangladesh. I'm from Southeast side, and I really, it's been an honor and me to be here. I would like to ask Dan to you, which is the LaRouche Foundation's been working for a long, long time, and has been organizing and managing so many departments, which is very good. And obviously, with an American, the American diaspora communities and all that. But I want to ask you, with the how do you establish, or how do you development having a connection with the southeast side, which is the countries related with Bangladesh, India, Malaysia, Singapore's, Nepal's, those countries. As you know, that new intern government, Professor Dr. Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel laureate, he is really, really, happy to connections with the country of the Bangladesh, throughout every organizations, foundations, and countries, and how LaRouche Foundation's organization going to be connecting with that, such as, and make that project or development more moving ahead with the country of the Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that question, and I'm going to also then have Jose take that. We have a couple minutes, but I will just say that, like solving the Russia-Ukraine war or Israel-Palestine or any of these, they don't occur in a vacuum. And the biggest fight is that we have to change. Part of why Dennis Speed's presentation was so important is that Americans actually don't know that our nation is not a colonial power, or not supposed to be. We've been acting like one. But the United States is going to really have to change, because the only way that any of these situations can be addressed, where every nation is equally sovereign and allowed to develop, is that the United States gets back its identity as an anti-colonial nation, right? How did John Quincy Adams say? He didn't only say, do not seek abroad for monsters to destroy, but he had an idea that by our defending a standard of freedom and principle here, that we would reach, this wasn't isolationist, that we would reach, or E. Peshine Smith, we would reach to other nations in trade and development, which would allow them to replicate a similar process of development as we had undergone here, but not by bludgeoning nations and saying, you must do X. I think the Belt and Road Initiative of China has created a great opportunity. There's about 165 nations that are connecting. And when you have trade along corridors of transportation and development, you learn about other cultures, other religions. You get to take advantage of the best contributions of everyone. And I think we should look at the planet in terms of ports, where we can develop modern ports, rail, energy, these kind of things. But I think unless we actually move to an entirely new paradigm, there is no situation on the planet right now that will be solved in a pairwise relation. It's just not going to work. But I wanted to give Jose a chance, since he's running for Congress, federal office, to say something about this, if you don't mind. And there's a lot of Bangladeshi Americans in his district, I think. Yes. Yes.
Well, I don't have too much to add, but one thing I might recommend is we actually get together and really map out a project, or map out what the country could implement within the next 20 to 30 years. One of the things that Jason here had suggested we do, and we used to do this after we were reading excerpts of Earth's Next 50 Years, which is, I think there's a book of it back there by Lynn. People should pick a country, and they should talk about, and they should plan out, okay, well, let's just pick Bangladesh, for example, right? What do we want it to look like in 50 years? What actual projects can we build there, and how can we actually make it collaborate with other nations? So what I would propose to you is that you actually work with us to come up with a concrete proposal for what you're thinking, so that we can actually then implement this and work on it and organize it.
I would just add the suggestion that if you haven't already, to look through what we've proposed. I mean, we've had documents for decades along this world land bridge proposal that go through, including in the region of the world that you're talking about, the kinds of, and particularly cross-border projects. You know, a nation can make policy within its borders, but sometimes there are regional projects that only make sense when you get collaboration among several others. I'll give you one example here in the United States, NWAPA. It's a program to bring water from Alaska and Canada, through Canada, into the United States to help out the really dry West. It's not a national program. It has to be a regional program. Refilling Lake Chad in Africa. Chad can't do it. Well, none of the countries surrounding Lake Chad can do it on their own because they don't have the water. It has to come from the Congo River. So it's a regional program to be able to solve what seems like a local problem. The hydroelectric potential of the Congo River, similarly, it's very expensive to build all these hydro plants, but then you'd be able to ship power out to many countries around it. So I don't have anything so specific for what you're referring to, but
yeah. So if I can add on that, an example, America and Bangladesh, we got some the business transparency with the LNG gas has been signed both countries. An example of a renewable technology, when we can bring that renewable technology, which is myself, I am trying to work with the government, a renewable technology, how we can establish a renewable technology with the help of American, articles, American, some kind of renewable plant that they have. So I have went and talked to my governments and some kind of, ministry levels, and they told me, okay, once you are there, just trying to find out organizations or foundations or company who really wanted to tie up with the Bangladesh a renewable technology or EV electronic, so that how we can both countries can collaborate each other. Because Professor Dr. Muhammad Yunus is an international, a very iconic person. So he is willingly to connect those kind of project in terms of development or organize an American, American project or management or connecting more in deeper. So my question is that, is there any, as Jose says, that bring some proposal, we can sit down and we can find a way to do such as sort of things. So my thing is that I want to add on that top of it. So if I bring the proposals with the LaRouche Foundations, and then from there, if we can go connection with the Bangladesh government and such as a project with that, how that can be, work or collaborate, how we can, solve the issue of the climate changes or maybe renewables, some kind of problem. Yeah.
I think we can work that out just by talking. So we can do that over time. I mean, it's not something to answer here. We'll just get together and talk.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to go off the, what?
mention that LaRouche's IDB in 75, one of the projects was the Ganges-Brahmaputra river basin for electric.
He's bringing up the fact that one of LaRouche's projects in 1975 was the Ganges-Brahmaputra River Basin Development Project. We are going to end the live stream audience. We just have a couple announcements for people here. So thank you, everybody online, for being with us.